Today, we're going to just scratch the surface of my three favorite ways of how to facilitate that intrinsic motivation in autistic learners. And number one, right off the bat, I've talked about it before. I will talk about it until I'm blue in the face because it is the way to motivate anybody, really, but especially autistic learners. Hello, everybody. I am Rebecca Robbins, and this is Mind Shaper SLP, where we create fruitful and fulfilling lives for autistic individuals and their families. And today we're going to be doing that by talking about my three favorite ways to promote internal motivation in autistic individuals. Now, I recently put out a video called The Problem with Rewards. I'll link it to at the end of this video to make it easy for you. But in that video, I basically talked about the difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. And really, extrinsic motivation is when you offer a reward or reinforcer, you might be calling it, to motivate your child to participate in an activity or a task, right? Whereas internal motivation is when your child is just motivated from the inside to do something. I talked about the difference between the two in that video and what the problem is with offering rewards. So go check that out. But today, I want to talk about my three favorite ways of how to facilitate internal motivation in autistic individuals. And before we get too far down the rabbit hole, I just want to tell you the strategies that you're hearing today are some of the strategies that I will be talking about in my upcoming program called the Motivation Map Live. It's a 3-week immersive group learning experience hosted by me. You'll get 3 live workshops, access to a live Facebook group with weekly Q&As from me, and we're going to have a lot of fun and interaction in the Facebook groups. All of the workshops are just jam-packed with really functional, easy to implement strategies that you will be able to use to stop the drama, which is reducing anxiety and overwhelm and meltdowns with your autistic child, stop the bribes, which is how to facilitate intrinsic motivation with your child, and stop the nagging, which is how to facilitate your child to be as independent as they possibly can be. And when I say child, I mean any age, really. Your son and daughter of any age. It can be a kid or an adult child that you are still supporting. Today, we're going to just scratch the surface of my three favorite ways of how to facilitate that intrinsic motivation in autistic learners. And number one, right off the bat, I've talked about it before. I will talk about it until I'm blue in the face because it is the way to motivate anybody, really, but especially autistic learners. Use their interest, embed their interest into what you are doing rather than using the behavioral teaching methodology of taking what your child loves and what they're interested in and holding it out here as a carrot that's dangling for them to motivate them. You are now going to take what they love to do and find a way to embed it into the activity that you're doing, because when you do that, the activity itself is going to become motivating for your child. And stay tuned for the next video I'm going to be putting out later this week that's going to talk about all of the benefits of using intrinsic motivation with your child. So we'll save that for another day. But let's just talk about how we can incorporate your child's interest. One of the ways you can do this, and one of the easiest ways to do this, is make materials with your child's favorite characters or interest embedded into them. For example, if I was working on the past tense with one of my students, I might use sentences that are on topic of what they're really into. Maybe they're a huge SpongeBob fan. I would make up sentences about SpongeBob and Patrick Star and Squidward. And just by the fact that we're talking about SpongeBob and Patrick Star and Squidward, we're even using pictures from the show and talking about the things they did in the past tense, your SpongeBob fan is going to be more motivated to do that and to talk about that in the past tense, rather than if I were to just use plain materials or picture cards that have things that aren't relevant to them or they're not interested in. I had a student that loved looking at car logos, and he loved talking about them too, but his articulation skills made it so that when he would talk about these car logos with even familiar listeners in his life, we didn't know what he was saying or what he was talking about. So I went online to Google Images and I downloaded all the different emblems of all the different cars that I know that he liked to talk about. And we used those car logos as his articulation targets. And it was a functional task that now, when he wanted to talk about the car logos with the people in his life, people understood what he was talking about. And so it was exciting for him to continue talking to those people. And he was excited to work on improving his articulation for them because he loved talking about car logos. If you're working on reading comprehension, can you make up a story that has your child's favorite characters in them, or sub out the names of the people in the story with your child's favorite characters instead? All of a sudden they're more interested and paying more attention, and thus will understand what they're reading a little bit better. I have a student that really loves 90s bands, 90s pop music, 90s alternative music. He loves it all, and we were working on a concept of how many more. So I was using bar graphs to visually demonstrate this concept with him. And I ended up removing the labels that were on the bottom of the bar graph and putting the names of 90s rock stars in there instead. And I put like Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, NSYNC. And all of a sudden he was like, oh my gosh, this bar graph is about things I love. And he was much more motivated to pay attention. I also did that with Pokemon characters, which he was also into. Another way to incorporate your child's interest is to embed the work on a particular goal into a favorite toy or activity. So instead of adding the interest into the learning activity, you're targeting the goal as part of the activity of interest. So you're using the thing that they're already interested in to work on a goal. For example, I've done this a lot with my students that are working on requesting and they love iPad, or they love watching a YouTube video, or my students that like to watch a certain part of a video, but I have a requesting goal. So we would watch the video. I would have them request press play. Then they would say press stop, and then rewind, please, go, or say go back. And so I work on requesting. They get to do that thing of rewatching their favorite clip of that video over and over again, but they're also working on their requesting skills, and they're learning a functional request for something that they love to do and enjoy doing. And that really worked like a charm. I had another student, he had apraxia of speech as well as autism, and we were working on improving his ability to produce speech sounds and to produce his clarity of speech when he was speaking. We decided to start working on him saying the sounds in numbers. He really enjoyed playing the game Sorry. So we would play Sorry and we would work on him articulating his words by counting the spaces as he went around the board. And if you've ever played Sorry, you know that that's not a quick game. So he had lots of opportunities and practice to count out his movement with the pieces and practice saying his words. And being able to say numbers is a functional skill in life. He needs to be able to say numbers clearly to give someone his telephone number, give someone his address, give someone a social security number. So saying numbers clearly is a functional life skill for him. And we did it in the context of playing a game, and he loved it. Another thing you can do is embed the favorite toys or activities into what you're doing. For example, like using an echo mic. I don't know if you've ever seen the plastic microphones, and when you talk into them, it makes your voice sound echoey. When I have to work on articulation or speech sound production, that can be kind of monotonous and boring because you really do need to get repetition of saying words over and over again to really perfect that speech sound production. I would have students say it into a microphone, and hearing their voice sound silly was motivating to them. And so they were motivated to say their words. Or my students that were a little more hesitant or reluctant to initiate communication at all, they can hold their echo mic and say it into the echo mic. If a student has a favorite stuffed animal that's their comfort animal, and maybe they're shy or they tend to not initiate their speech, maybe you can have them make their animal talk instead. You can use minifigures from their favorite TV show for a game if you're working on game playing skills or turn taking skills. And because it's using their favorite characters instead of the little boring pawns that come with the game, they might be more motivated to participate in the game. I had a student that had a high level of sensory need and would spend a lot of time engaging in self-stimulatory behavior. And it was challenging to get him to be able to be motivated to engage with others. And he had these scarves that he loved playing with. So I took the scarves, I tied them together and I put them over my neck. So I was wearing the scarves and he had his scarves and he was playing with his scarves. And I put him in my rolling chair. This was when I still worked in a school. And we would go into the hallway and he would request, like, push. And I would push. I just noticed some fireworks going off, so I guess Zoom liked this activity. I'm not sure why that happened, but that was fun. I would get requests out of him, and he was super motivated and so much more connected and engaged with me because I let him keep his favorite things while we were doing it. It's not about taking away your child's interest. It's a finding a way to get them into the activity as much as possible because that's going to light your child up and have them want to do what it is you want them to do as well. That was a lot. It's okay because that's the best tip, okay? Tip number 2 is keep learning functional and as hands-on as possible with younger learners or learners that have a high level of sensory need. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to use movement whenever possible. I had a student who was very active, again, very high sensory needs. He was non-speaking, and so we were working on communication with his device, which he really wasn't super interested in unless it was to request his preferred items. And so we were trying to expand his ability to use his communication device for other purposes. And so we were working on him combining 2 words together on his device, and he loved this ball popping toy that I had. And at the school I worked with at the time, I had this really cool ramp that led to an exit door. And so I had a scooter, like one of those, I'm probably dating myself. Do you remember those scooters you sat on in gym class to play crab soccer? Of course you do. I know you do. I got one of those scooters from the OTPT room and I put the base of the ball toy at the top of the ramp, and I had a bowl of all of the balls at the bottom of the ramp, along with his communication device. He laid on his belly on the scooter, and he would request on the device which ball he wanted. He would say yellow ball or blue ball. I give him the ball. He'd ride the scooter up, put it on the ball toy, and then he got to ride the scooter back down the ramp and then he would request, I think there was like 5 or 6 balls. And then when he got all the balls, he got the payoff of getting to push the button, which I think I also tried to get him to say push button on the device, of course. I'm a speech pathologist. I'm trying to get all the communication I can. And he loved it. If I had just had that on the table and I had the ball sitting in my hands, he'd be like, I'm not interested. This isn't cool for me. But because I incorporated that movement aspect, he was getting some sensory input, he was getting movement. It made his brain so much more engaged and he was so much more motivated to communicate it, to get those balls and play with that toy. There is an Instagram account that is really, really great with coming up of like ideas about incorporating movement into learning called at Sprinkle in Learning. I follow them and there's always some really fun, great tips that they have on that account. So I highly suggest you go check them out. You can do other things like create a scavenger hunt where and like you're working on following directions by doing the scavenger hunt, or you have like a math problem hiding. We do this sort of thing in my buddy group. Actually, we do scavenger hunts, and when they find the clue, then there's some sort of a social task that they're doing, whether it's like, oh, find a common interest with your partner or whatever it is, whatever skill we're practicing that day. And my students, who are teens and adults, by the way, they love this because they get to move around and work together. And so anytime you can incorporate movement is going to really enhance internal motivation to participate in a task. You can do things like have your child deliver messages from one family member to another family member in the house. And that's a great way to practice communication skills and language skills. So if they are delivering a message to another person in the house, like, oh, go tell dad it's time for dinner, they have to store that information in their brain, hold it there until they get to the next room. And then they have to initiate communication, say, Dad, it's time for dinner. And that's a great skill to work on with your child. Very functional, and it incorporates movement. I think the best way to keep learning functional and hands-on is to incorporate their learning into real life tasks. There's so much you can do with cooking activities that really are functional life skills. They work on executive functioning skills. They work on language skills. I do a lot of work with my students with cooking activities. For example, we'll take a baking recipe off of a box, like a cake box mix, and I help them comprehend what the directions are saying, because we take for granted how much implied information is in a recipe. It's a really functional skill for a child or young adult to know how to cook their favorite foods. And so we go through the recipe box and we list out what the food ingredients are and what the cooking supplies are that we need before we even do anything. And then work on them gathering all those things in the kitchen and then actually doing the baking activity. And there's so many skills that are being worked on in that task. And of course, I use declarative language as much as possible so that I'm really helping my students problem solve during that activity, which is another strategy that I use for internal motivation and independence. More on that later. But the more you can keep things functional and hands-on and relevant to an autistic learner, the more motivated they're going to be. And the more they're going to be able to generalize it into their life because you're doing it in a functional context. I do this too with my older students that I do executive functioning coaching with money. I'll have families buy like a fake money set on Amazon, and they have some fake money sets that like are the actual size of money. They look like real money, and we work on counting. Who doesn't love counting money, right? And what a functional life skill that is, right? If I could teach a student to count mixed money, bills and coin, they can be a cashier, right? If I could teach them how to count money, how to make change, that's a very functional life skill that they can then use to get a job. So the more we can keep things functional, the more relevant it's going to be to your son or daughter, and the more motivated they're going to be to participate in, and the more likely it will be to generalize that skill and be independent with that skill outside of the structured practice. Which leads me to tip number 3, and it might be my most favorite of all, and it's probably the simplest, but probably the hardest for some people. It comes naturally to me because I'm a clown and I like to make people laugh, but don't be afraid to be silly. If all else fails, just ask yourself, how can I make this fun? If you are bored to tears helping your child participate in whatever the task or activity is, chances are your child is too, and that's not going to really enhance their intrinsic motivation to participate. So how can we make it fun? How can we make it silly? If your child is giving you a resistance, taking the bath every night, can you turn off the lights? Get one of those like fun laser lights or whatever, put that in the bathroom. So all of a sudden it's like a light show in the bathroom. And maybe that would be enough to like really entice your child to go into the bathroom and take a bath, because look, it's like a party in here. Maybe put some fun music on if it's not too sensory overwhelming for your child to do so. But it's okay to be silly and to be funny. I think that sometimes parents get hung up on this if they're trying to get their child to comply with a task or an activity. And if you start being silly or fun during the activity, is that kind of like reinforcing the non-compliance, if we're talking about this in behavioral terms, which many of you probably come from a behavior learning background? And the answer is no. Because when we do that, when we are silly and when we are fun with our child, even if it didn't start out that way and we shift gears and make it that way, what you're doing is you are helping your child's nervous system calm down. And when your child's nervous system is calm, that's when the part of their brain that makes logical, rational choices and is available for learning, that's when that part of the brain comes back on in control. If your child is resisting you or crying or fighting you, that means their downstairs brain is in control. Their guard dog is in control. Those are some more techniques and strategies we're going to talk about in the motivation map during Stop the Drama. So go check out that link for more on that. When your child is upset, they're operating from that place, and the only thing they can do is they think that their brain is perceiving that situation the same as death. If they are operating from that downstairs part of their brain, they're only able to fight, flight, or freeze. And that is not going to help their internal motivation. That is not going to help you get to the finish line of whatever task or activity you're in. So if you, as the adult, can recognize, oof, what I'm doing right now is not working. How can I be a little silly? How can I be fun? And you're not giving into the behavior. You're not reinforcing the behavior. My mom used to do this thing with me, and I hated it as a child, but it worked like a charm every time. When I was being like, meh, 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 she would say, don't you dare smile. Whatever you do, hey, don't you smile. And inevitably it would make me smile, even though I would try so hard not to because I wanted to be mad. I couldn't. It made me smile and it just lightened the mood. And all of a sudden we were back on better terms and moving forward. So the more you can be silly, have fun, is only going to do good things for your relationship with your child and for your child's internal motivation. So ways that I do this is I make funny faces. So I had a student, I actually just had to do this the other day with him. We were working really hard on irregular past tense, and he was having a very hard time generalizing it. He said hadn't. And I went, oh, and he goes, what's that face? And I said, this is the face your speech teacher makes when you say a word that doesn't exist. And he thought that was hysterical. So then he inevitably started saying the irregular past tense words incorrectly to get me to make that face, which you might think would be counteractive, right? But no, because it brought his awareness to this is not the right way to say this word. And he would say, oh, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. And he would say the word correctly. And next thing you know, he's using his irregular past tense just fine. Although the other day he said had it. And I went, oh, and we were right back there. And he was like, oh, sorry. It was funny. And we both laughed. So you can make funny faces. You can use silly voices. That's always fun. I used to do things like take a regular object and put it on my head as a hat with like younger kids. They thought that was hysterical, or I would sneeze it off my head. They thought that was funny. You can just be over dramatic. Obviously, I'm an actress. I'm a little over dramatic with my emotions. So that comes easily to me when I'm interacting with my students. But it's okay to be over dramatic. And with older students, you can just use playful sarcasm. It's not a bad idea to give your child exposure to sarcasm so that they get familiar with it and understand it, and just be funny. Your child will not go off into silly world and you'll never bring them back. That's not going to happen. And you're not going to reinforce bad behavior if you decide to shift up what you're doing and be silly. But the more that you can be silly and come at an activity with the intention of, okay, how can I make this fun? How can I be silly? That just opens up your mind to a problem solving place so that you can engage your child in a way that will be more fun and motivating. As I said earlier, these 3 techniques are just a few of the nuggets that I will be sharing in the Stop the Bribes workshop during the Motivation Map Live. And of course, we're going to go into all of these into greater detail. And I have more to share in that workshop as to how you can facilitate intrinsic motivation. Plus, you get the opportunity to interact with me directly so that you can get answers to your questions about your own child and your own specific situation that maybe you're having a power struggle or butting heads with your child about. You can check out that link down below in the description. It's RebeccaRobinsSLP.com/motivate, or I have a free workshop on how to navigate power struggles with your child so that everybody wins. And you can get that at RebeccaRobinsSLP.com/ Power Struggle on Demand. So go check those out. I really hope I see you in June at the Motivation Map Live. And let me know in the comments below if you have questions about how to use intrinsic motivation with your child or how to use some of the strategies that we talked about today with your child. Give me a specific example. I'm happy to give you my ideas and suggestions. That's it for today. I will see you next time.